As you mindlessly scroll through your phone in your room, you have probably heard the phrase hopeless spending, or what American youth call the doom spending syndrome. This is a psychological phenomenon where young people decide to burn money on small luxury items instead of saving for a future they believe they will never be able to reach. This feeling of being stuck is absolutely not a flaw in thinking or the laziness of a generation. It is actually a completely well-founded defense mechanism against a macroeconomic system that is silently fracturing from within. If you patiently stay until the final seconds of this video, I promise you will see through the entire ruthless operation of the global economy. You will understand the nature of cash flow through a single metaphor: a giant casino built right on top of a seismic fault line waiting to snap. And right at this moment, that fault line is beginning to shake violently, stemming from the sparks just ignited in the Middle East. In the early days of March 2026, the world abruptly woke up to the deafening explosions of a direct conflict between the US, Israel, and Iran. This is not simply a war for political influence in a distant, dusty land. It is a knife stabbed straight into the energy umbilical cord of the global economy. As soon as the first missiles left their launchers, financial markets worldwide simultaneously bled without mercy. In just a few short trading sessions, trillions of dollars in market capitalization completely evaporated from stock exchanges, ranging from lavish Wall Street to financial centers in Asia. The extreme panic of investors did not stem from the immediate military damage on the battlefield. It stemmed from a much deeper and more primal fear: the fear of a complete rupture in the world's energy lifeblood. Open the geographical map and direct your attention to the Strait of Hormuz. A cramped, narrow strip of water sandwiched between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. This is the economic choke point of all humanity, where approximately 20% of the world's total oil and natural gas must pass through every single day. When Iran announced a blockade and threatened to sink cargo ships passing through this strait, they were not merely locking down massive fuel tankers. They were literally squeezing the survival heartbeat of the entire modern industry on the planet. Crude oil prices immediately spiked fiercely, surpassing the $80 a barrel mark in the blink of an eye, extinguishing all hopes for a stable economy. Leading financial institutions have started to sound the alarm about the prospect of oil prices easily hitting the $100 threshold, or even the worst-case scenario of $150 a barrel if the war drags on. For an ordinary working citizen, oil might seem like just a thick, black liquid used to fill up car gas tanks every morning. But the cold truth is that oil is flowing through every nook and cranny of all the objects you touch and use daily. From the sophisticated plastic casing on your smartphone to the massive amounts of fertilizer that help maintain the cheap food supply chain, everything is composed of and operated based on this fossil energy source. When global energy costs soar, it does not stop at making you pay an extra 20 cents for every gallon of gas at the local pump. It instantly triggers a devastating domino effect, pushing maritime shipping costs, industrial production costs, and warehousing costs for all types of goods to a completely new price level that is totally out of control. The inevitable and most brutal consequence of this vortex is the rise of a phantom that terrifies the entire financial world: inflation. The return of inflation in the context of war is like a metastasizing cancer, thoroughly destroying all previous treatment efforts by central banks worldwide. Throughout the post-pandemic years, the U.S. has had to grit its teeth and endure successive interest rate hikes in an attempt to restrain the inflation monster that was swallowing the purchasing power of its citizens. Just recently, the financial elite still complacently believed that they had taken down that monster, and that the economy was achieving a safe soft landing. But the explosions in the Middle East have poured a bucket of freezing water on those naive expectations and blind optimism. When supply chains are choked and energy becomes absurdly expensive, inflation will flare up again, not because people have too much money to spend, but because the cost of maintaining the existence of society has become unbearable. This is the worst and most difficult type of inflation to deal with in the history of economics. Known as cost-push inflation. It creates a perfect trap, a pincer movement that slowly crushes both economic growth and the purchasing power of fiat currency. The U.S. Federal Reserve now stands at a life-or-death crossroads with no choices that yield a good outcome. If they decide to continue anchoring interest rates at a high level to fight the upward momentum of commodity prices, they will directly suffocate the liquidity of businesses currently shouldering massive debts. This action would ruthlessly push the U.S. economy into a free fall toward a deep recession, dragging millions into unemployment and permanently freezing the real estate market. On the contrary, if they yield to the pressure, deciding to print more money and lower interest rates to salvage the financial markets, they will add fuel to the raging fire of inflation. Regardless of which path the system chooses, the scythe of ruin will ultimately strike the heads of the ordinary working class. To understand why a conflict in the Gulf has the power to dictate the fate of the dollars in your wallet, we must turn back the calculating pages of history from the 1970s. That was the moment when the gold-backed monetary system officially collapsed, forcing the United States into a position where it had to seek a new anchor to maintain its global financial hegemony. The solution proposed by the elite at that time was the birth of the petrodollar system, a masterpiece in the art of geopolitical manipulation. An inviolable tacit agreement was established, in which the world's largest oil-exporting nations agreed to sell their resources exclusively in U.S. dollars. In return, they received absolute military and political protection from the world's number one superpower. This sophisticated mechanism created a massive, continuous, and inexhaustible demand for American paper currency on a global scale. Any nation on Earth that wanted to buy energy to light up its cities and operate its factories was forced to stockpile billions of dollars. This very privilege has allowed the U.S. government to freely print money and export its inflation to the rest of the world for over half a century, without facing an immediate collapse in the value of its currency. But the petrodollar system is not an eternal fortress. The war in 2026 is exposing the fatal cracks in this system. As nations realize that the dollar can be weaponized and the flow of energy can be interrupted at any moment, they will quietly seek other fallback routes, pushing the current financial structure to the brink of disintegration. Returning to the social picture in America, where the younger generation is feeling the system's betrayal of their future most acutely. The United States recorded a record goods trade deficit of $1.24 trillion in the year 2025. This massive deficit, combined with expensive public spending packages and an ever-expanding defense budget, means that the government is spending far beyond what it actually produces. To cover this gaping hole, the money printing machine must run continuously. The dollar in your wallet, which is essentially just pieces of paper backed by faith, is having its purchasing power squeezed dry day by day. Every time the government decides to fund wars halfway across the globe, that is when a portion of your labor and wealth is invisibly stolen. Inflation never knocks on your door to ask for permission. It is the cruelest kind of tax, silently eroding all the saving efforts of the middle class, turning long-term financial plans into scraps of paper. In every major economic crisis and geopolitical upheaval, there is always a harsh truth hidden behind the chaotic news broadcasts. That is the greatest and fiercest wealth transfer process in human history. When the stock market plunges and the prices of necessities escalate to absurd levels, young people and low-income families will be the first victims pushed to the brink. They will be forced to cut back on the most basic needs, permanently abandon the dream of homeownership, and sink deeper into the debt trap of credit cards with exorbitant interest rates. The high cost of food, energy, and healthcare is turning the lives of millions of Americans into a harsh battle for survival from one paycheck to the next. At the bottom of the financial pyramid, there is no room for aspirations of advancement, only an exhausting struggle that wears away human dignity. On the contrary, look up to the top of the pyramid. where the ultra-rich and giant monopolistic corporations are observing this chaos with cold and calculating eyes. For them, a crisis is not a disaster, but a once-in-a-millennium opportunity to consolidate power and accumulate assets at dirt-cheap prices. They possess enough resources, information, and connections to protect their capital flows from macroeconomic shocks. When the market collapses, they use cash to buy out bankrupt small businesses, acquire foreclosed valuable real estate, and tighten their monopoly on essential supply chains. The war in the Middle East, whether carried out in the name of protecting democracy or the world order, is ultimately still a massive pumping and siphoning machine. It drains resources and surplus value from the blood, sweat, and tears of the masses, letting it flow upward into the bottomless pockets of an anonymous, powerful minority. This structural dead end perfectly explains the giving up syndrome and hopeless spending of today's Generation Z. Those born and raised over the past 2 decades have had to witness too many broken empty promises. From the horrifying collapse of the housing bubble in 2008, to the devastating consequences of the global pandemic, and now the dark prospect of a war completely severing the economic order. From their school desks, they were indoctrinated with the mindset that if they just worked hard, spent frugally, and trusted the retirement system, they would have a peaceful old age. But brutal reality has dealt them a direct slap in the face. All their efforts to grit their teeth and save are brutally diluted by the fiat monetary system, and blown away by unpredictable price storms. Their choice to live for the present and spend on short-term pleasures is not thoughtless impulsivity. It is the helpless sigh of players realizing they are trapped in a rigged card game, where the rules are always bent to protect the house. The government and mainstream media constantly strive to maintain a beautiful illusion of control and stability. They want you to implicitly believe that policymakers are genius minds, capable of steering the economic ship through all historical storms. Whenever the economy shows signs of cracking, television news is flooded with elegantly suited experts, presenting promising forecast charts about recovery and miraculous bailout stimulus packages. But in reality, all those flowery words are merely temporary painkillers meant to cover up the terminal illness eating away at the very marrow of the macroeconomic structure. The deeper the government's intervention and the more money printed, the more the tumor of societal debt swells beyond imagination. And as an inevitable law of physics as well as finance, the price to pay for the collapse in the next cycle will always be more brutal and widespread than the previous one. If we take a step back to observe the big picture with historical thinking, what is happening in the year 2026 is absolutely not a random or anomalous event. It follows a mathematical model that has repeated itself many times throughout the development of civilizations. Whenever a monetary system reaches the absolute breaking point of credit expansion and reckless money printing, an external catalyst will always emerge to ignite a painful reset process. Large-scale wars always serve as the most perfect catalyst. It provides both a justifiable reason to explain the sudden impoverishment of the masses and a logical excuse for political powers to further tighten control over all civil activities. History rarely repeats itself exactly in every detail, but it always creates rhymes so chillingly similar, reminding us of human arrogance in the face of cyclical laws. In the darkness of economic chaos, the law of financial survival is also being ruthlessly reshaped. The vital difference between the elite class and the rest of society lies in the perception of the true nature of assets. While ordinary workers are still clinging to paper money evaporating in value by the hour in bank accounts, or betting their fate on highly risky stock portfolios on mobile apps, the real sharks in the market have already shifted their massive capital flows early on. They are scooping up every real asset they can get their hands on. Things that possess immutable intrinsic value and cannot be printed by any central bank decree. These could be fertile agricultural lands, control over rare precious metal mines, or stakes in core energy infrastructure. When the smoke of the war settles and inflation sweeps through every corner, debt papers may return to their true value as mere scraps of paper. But real assets will exist eternally, serving as the foundation to establish a new order of power. And now, let's return to the core metaphor I promised you at the beginning of this video. The current global economy, with the US fiat monetary system as its nucleus, exactly simulates the image of a magnificent casino, built proudly right on top of a seismic fault line waiting to snap. Inside that lavish casino, the neon lights are always brightly colored, the music is always soothing, and the players always delude themselves that they can get rich if they know how to roll the dice. Inflation, credit card debt, and bailout packages are the chips the house generously hands out to keep you staying in the game. But what most people are blinded to and fail to realize is that all this glitz is propped up by an extremely fragile energy and geopolitical system that could collapse at any moment. The bomb that just dropped in the Gulf region is no different from an 8-magnitude earthquake, striking straight at the foundation of this grand casino. When the ground beneath your feet begins to crack and the pillars of the casino shake, the illusory chips in your hands will instantly become worthless. You cannot trade inflation-eaten paper money for food security, or hope to buy peace when the global supply chain is completely severed. The fierce war between the US and Iran today is not just a news event for you to apathetically scroll past on your phone screen every night. It is the deepest and coldest alarm bell regarding the limits of financial power, and the extreme fragility of systems we have always taken for granted as solid. Wake up immediately from the vain dreams painted by media algorithms, and start looking at the economy with eyes that are colder, sharper, and more realistic than ever before. The ultimate survivor in this cruel game is not the one who blindly accumulates the most plastic chips while the casino lights are still on. The true winner is the one sober enough to recognize the mechanical shaking of the building, and quietly carry their real assets out the emergency exit, before the real chaos begins.